On a summer morning in June 2025, a 29-year-old woman walked into her mother's house with bruises across her arms, chest, and neck. Signs of a brutal struggle she said she didn't think she would survive. Her name was Sharita Cristwell. Sharita had made one of the most frightening phone calls of her life, telling police that her ex-boyfriend and the father of her 2 daughters had beaten her and tried to strangle her. The man was arrested and prosecutors at the hearing argued he was too dangerous to go home, but Sharita, the victim herself, asked the judge to release him, calling him a hard-working father. Less than 3 weeks later, Sharita was found shot to death inside an apartment in Prince George's County, Maryland. How did a woman who warned authorities about her own imminent danger end up dead? This is her story. Before we continue, it's important to understand what this story is, and what it is not. The events you are about to hear are real. They are drawn from publicly available court records, police reports, and verified news coverage. This documentary is not intended to sensationalize violence, speculate on guilt, or re-traumatize those affected. At the center of this story is a woman who did what many are encouraged to do. She reported abuse, she sought help, and she trusted the system meant to protect her. Some details have been omitted or paraphrased to preserve dignity and privacy, but the facts remain unchanged. This is a story about domestic violence, warning signs, and the devastating consequences when danger is known, but prevention fails. We tell it to remember Sharita Cristwell, and to understand how stories like hers continue to happen. Viewer discretion is advised. Before her name appeared in headlines, before courtrooms and police reports reduced her story to dates and charges, Sharita Cristwell was, first and foremost, a 29-year-old mother trying to build a life for her daughters. According to public reporting and family accounts shared after her death, Sharita lived in the Landover area of Prince George's County, Maryland. She was deeply connected to her family, a daughter, a sister, and a constant presence in the lives of those who loved her. Those closest to her described her as warm, loyal, and protective, especially when it came to her children. She was raising 2 young daughters. To her, motherhood wasn't just a role, it was her identity. Friends and relatives later told reporters that her world revolved around her girls. School routines, meals, bedtime rituals, the ordinary, repetitive, beautiful details of parenting filled her days. Family members publicly shared that Sharita was the type of mother who wanted stability for her children. She wanted them to grow up feeling secure and loved. Even amid relationship struggles, she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy inside her home. Like many young mothers, Sharita balanced responsibilities quietly. There were errands, bills, childcare, and the invisible emotional labor that often goes unnoticed. Her life wasn't defined by chaos. It was defined by routine, school drop-offs, grocery runs, family conversations, and planning for the future. Those who knew her say she had a gentle but determined personality. She wasn't someone who sought attention. She kept much of her personal struggle private. From the outside, her life appeared steady, the life of a young woman focused on raising her children and keeping her household together. And that context matters. Because when we talk about what happened later, the assault, the court hearing, the final confrontation, it's important to understand that Sharita was not a statistic. She was not a headline waiting to happen. She was a mother trying to navigate a complicated relationship while holding on to hope for stability. Public reports show that she shared 2 daughters with Harry Dominique Lindsay, the man later charged in her death. But before criminal charges and courtrooms entered the picture, there was a shared history, co-parenting, family ties, and years of emotional connection. Friends and family would later reflect on how much she valued family unity. Even during periods of tension, she believed in giving chances. That belief, that hope, would later shape crucial decisions. In the months leading up to June 2025, there were no public indications that her life would soon become the subject of news coverage. She was simply living her life, parenting, navigating relationships, and trying to move forward. And perhaps that's what makes her story so heavy. Because when we look back at Sharita's life before the crime, what stands out isn't danger. It's normalcy. It's a young woman laughing with her sisters. It's a mother braiding her daughter's hair. It's someone who believed things could work out. Before she became a victim in a case that would spark conversations about domestic violence and court decisions, She was just Sharita, a daughter, a sister, a mother, building a future she believed she had time to protect. Sharita Cristwell and Harry Dominic Lindsay shared more than a history. They shared children. They shared years of emotional connection. And like many couples whose lives become deeply intertwined, separating wasn't simple, especially when two young daughters stood at the center of everything. Public report confirms that Lindsay was the father of Sharita's two children. At one point, they were building a life together, raising daughters, navigating adulthood, and managing the everyday pressures that come with parenting. To outsiders, it may have looked like an ordinary young family. Two parents, two children, an apartment in Prince George's County. The kind of life built quietly, without headlines. But relationships are rarely as simple as they appear from the outside. Over time, cracks began to show. By June 2025, court records would reveal that the relationship had deteriorated significantly. The two were no longer simply partners, they were navigating a complicated co-parenting dynamic. Emotions were layered, history was long, and unresolved tension lingered beneath the surface. By mid-June, the conflict inside Sharita Cristwell's relationship had moved beyond arguments. It became physical. On June 16, Sharita called police. According to public reports, she told officers that Harry Dominic Lindsay had assaulted her, and that during the attack, he strangled her. Strangulation is different from other forms of violence. It is silent. It is intimate. And it happens at a distance measured in inches. In her statement to authorities, Sharita described struggling to breathe. Officers documented visible injuries. The encounter wasn't treated as a minor dispute, it resulted in criminal charges. Lindsay was arrested and charged with first and second-degree assault. This was the turning point, the moment when a relationship crossed into documented, life-threatening violence. Police reports indicated she had difficulty breathing after the attack. Officers observed marks consistent with strangulation. This wasn't an accusation built on fear alone, it was supported by physical evidence noted at the scene. Yet what followed would confuse many observers later. Despite reporting the assault, Sharita remained emotionally connected to the father of her children. When Lindsay appeared before a judge, prosecutors argued he was dangerous. They presented the details of the assault, including the strangulation, as a warning sign. But Sharita herself addressed the court. She asked for his release. Public records later reported she described him as a good father and expressed support for him being allowed back into the community under supervision. To outsiders, the request seemed contradictory. Why would someone who had just survived a violent assault advocate for the release of the person accused of harming them? But domestic violence experts say this pattern is common. Abuse often coexists with emotional attachment. Fear coexists with hope. And survival sometimes depends on maintaining peace rather than severing ties. For Sharita, the connection wasn't only emotional, it was parental. Two daughters still needed their father. And in many domestic violence situations, victims weigh safety against stability, protection against practicality, and justice against family structure. The judge ultimately released Lindsay on home detention with electronic monitoring. Legally, safeguards were in place. But physically, distance was limited. After the assault, Sharita was living with knowledge she couldn't unknow. The person she shared children with had nearly choked her unconscious. Yet daily life continued. Sharita had survived the first life-threatening encounter. But statistically, survivors of strangulation face a dramatically increased risk of being killed by the same partner later. And the calendar was moving toward July 5th. July 5th, 2025. It was a Saturday afternoon in Landover, Maryland. A holiday weekend. When neighborhoods are usually quiet, families indoors, the air still heavy with summer heat. Inside an apartment in Prince George's County, Sharita Cristwell was with her two daughters. According to public report, it was confirmed that sometime in the mid-afternoon, an argument broke out between Sharita and Harry Dominic Lindsay. What exactly was said inside that apartment is not publicly known. But what is known is the time. Around 3:35 p.m., police were called. Officers responded to reports of a shooting at the apartment complex in Landover. When they arrived, they found Sharita suffering from gunshot wounds. First responders attempted aid, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 29 years old. The same woman who had reported being strangled weeks earlier. The same woman who had stood in court asking for his release. The escalation that researchers warn about had now reached its most final stage. According to authorities, Lindsay fled the apartment after the shooting. By the time police arrived, he was gone. The scene left behind was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a homicide investigation. Police secured the building. Detectives began canvassing the area. Evidence markers replaced children's toys. Crime scene tape wrapped around what had once been an ordinary doorway. The daughters were inside the apartment when the shooting occurred, according to public reports. In many domestic homicide cases, children are not only witnesses to instability, they are present when it turns irreversible. Investigators began working quickly. Surveillance footage in the area was reviewed. Patrol units searched surrounding streets. Information about Lindsay was circulated to officers across the region. Because at this point, the case had changed. He was no longer a defendant awaiting trial on assault charges. He was now the suspect in a murder. Authorities publicly identified Harry Dominique Lindsay as the suspect and launched an active search. The timeline moved fast. Within 24 hours, law enforcement located him in Capitol Heights, Maryland. He was taken into custody without incident. The legal case that had begun as an assault prosecution was now a homicide prosecution. One argument. One decision. One moment of irreversible violence. Domestic homicides often happen quickly. There is rarely a drawn-out sequence. They escalate in minutes, sometimes seconds. And for Sharita, the warning signs that had built over weeks culminated in one afternoon. The legal system had intervened before. The risks had been documented before. The charges had been filed before. But none of that prevented what happened inside that apartment on July 5th. By evening, news outlets were reporting the shooting. Police statements were brief and procedural. The community began to learn what had happened. Another domestic violence case. Another young mother. Another set of children left behind. But this was not just a statistic. This was the final chapter of a relationship that had shown escalating danger, and the moment when those warning signs became fatal reality. For Sharita's family, the reality of what had happened was only starting to settle in. The case had transformed from an assault prosecution into a homicide investigation. Prosecutors formally charged Lindsay with first and second-degree murder. He was ordered held without bond. The same courtroom system that weeks earlier debated supervised release was now processing a murder case. For investigators, the focus shifted from prevention to reconstruction, piecing together the timeline that led to July 5th. Evidence technicians documented the scene. Witnesses were interviewed. Digital records were analyzed. Every domestic homicide investigation asks the same questions. What led to this moment? Was there warning? Could it have been stopped? Meanwhile, Sharita's family faced something far more immediate: grief made public. Relatives described her as a devoted mother. Community members created memorials. Fundraising pages were organized to support her daughters, who now faced a future without their mother. In cases like this, unfolds on two different tracks. One moves through courts, charges, hearings, procedures, legal definitions. The other moves through people, funerals, memories, and the absence left behind in daily life. Neighbors who once passed her casually now spoke to reporters. They described shock. They described disbelief. Many said they never imagined violence could escalate so quickly. But for advocates, the pattern was painfully familiar. An earlier assault. A reported strangulation. A monitored release. And then, weeks later, a fatal encounter. The arrest brought legal closure to the search, but not emotional closure to the family. Because custody does not reverse time. And criminal charges do not restore what was lost. For Sharita's daughters, the legal process ahead would be long and distant. Trials, hearings, and legal arguments would unfold over months or years, all while childhood continued without their mother's presence. The community response reflected both mourning and reflection. Conversations turn toward domestic violence protections and whether warning signs are recognized soon enough. Cases like this often leave two legacies: a legal case file and a cautionary story. By the time Lindsay was booked into custody and held without bond, the outcome had already reshaped multiple lives, permanently. This case reflects a reality advocates have long described. Intervention alone is not always separation, and supervision alone is not always safety. In the aftermath, conversations often turn toward what could have been done differently. Stronger restrictions, faster trials, mandatory separation. But prevention is complex. Because many victims do not want permanent separation, they want the violence to stop. They want the relationship repaired, not erased. And systems built to punish after harm occurs struggle to manage situations where the goal is safety without total severance. The story of Sharita Cristwell is not only about a crime that happened. It is about the warning signs that appeared before it. It is about the human decisions made inside emotional relationships. And it is about how difficult it can be to recognize when a dangerous moment is approaching, especially for the person living inside it. Public awareness campaigns often repeat a single message: escalation matters. A serious assault is rarely the final event. Sometimes, it is the beginning of the most dangerous period. The challenge for communities, courts, and families is recognizing risk early enough to act, and having tools strong enough to interrupt it. Because once a case becomes a homicide investigation, prevention is no longer possible. Only understanding remains. Sharita's daughters will grow up hearing about who their mother was, her kindness, her routines, her care for them. Their understanding of her life will come through stories told by others. And that may be the quietest consequence of domestic violence. Not just a life lost, but memories unfinished. Cases like this leave communities asking whether tragedy could have been avoided. There is rarely a simple answer, but there is a clear lesson repeated across many similar cases. Danger often announces itself before it arrives. Sometimes quietly, sometimes briefly, and sometimes only visible when looking backward. Sharita Cristwell's story ends in July 2025, but the questions it raises continue long after. In courtrooms, in advocacy centers, and in homes where people try to decide whether conflict is temporary or a warning. If there is meaning to be taken from what happened, it is not found in the moment of violence. It is found in the moments before it. The moments where awareness, support, and intervention may still have time to matter.